Hey everyone and welcome back. Today I'm really excited because I'm going to be talking about my experience shooting with the Widelux. For those who are new to my channel, my name is Laura. I'm a freelance DP and photographer based in LA. I love to make relaxing photography content, and I also have a full-length video on my trip to New York where I shot with the Widelux, which you can check out here. I actually love shooting with this camera so much that I picked up an F6. I was planning on buying another camera at the end of this year. I was considering some other different ones, but as soon as I used the Widelux, I fell in love immediately. I already shot a test roll, some of the photos are in this video, and at the end, I'll tell you more about the next video coming up where you can see the rest of them. In this video, first I'm going to show you how to load the camera, then I'll go over 5 tips for shooting with it, and lastly, the pros and cons with using it. The Widelux is the camera that Jeff Bridges famously uses, and he's shot some really beautiful photos with, so I was super excited to try it out. I personally love loading this camera. It reminds me of loading motion picture film. I've done my fair share of loading and shooting on the Panaflex, so I just loved it. But it can be a bit finicky. I definitely struggled on my first attempt, but by my second and third rolls, I was feeling pretty confident. The first thing you want to do is give yourself slack on the film. I found that stretching it out to the end of the camera helps the best. Next, you have to get it under the first roller and over the film plane. Then there's a second roller you have to slide it under. This one can get tricky. You want to slide it through the middle so that the film doesn't get caught on the teeth at the bottom. Then there's a little opening on the take-up side that you want to slide the film into. Once it feels secure, you can click the shutter and advance the film. Cover the film and make sure to twist the knob to lock it into place. Now you're ready to go. So here are my 5 tips for shooting with it. The first and most important thing you must know when using this camera is to not change the shutter speed before you've advanced the film. If you do that, it will damage the gears inside the camera. So just to reiterate, advance first, then change the shutter. You also want to make sure you don't force the shutter if it doesn't click into place. You just want to go back to the original shutter and then try again. Make sure to keep your fingers out of the way. Luckily, I have small fingers, so even when I did forget on the first roll that I shot, it didn't show up. But it definitely took some time to remember and to adjust to holding the camera in this way. I try to hold it like this, even though it's a little awkward, I still feel like it's secure in my hands. And if it's secure enough to hold on to on a moving ferry without dropping it in the river, I think that's secure enough for me. I was definitely not gonna let that happen. What I also like about this camera is you don't have to frame using the viewfinder, since it's a little off from the lens and it's such a wide field of view. If you want to, you can use the arrows on the top of the camera to see your field of view, and that way you can also see the balance at the top too. I usually frame with the viewfinder, but I definitely did experiment in New York with taking photos without looking through it, and I honestly don't remember which is which, and I can't tell the difference. Because it is so wide, I feel like it's also pretty forgiving, and honestly that's really freeing. Play with the shutter speeds. Move the camera while taking pictures. Take photos from interesting angles. The fact that this is a swing lens camera is so unique that I feel like you have to take advantage of it. This is truly one of the main reasons that I got the F6. I really want to take my time with this camera and get creative and test its limits. I even want to try shooting vertically too. One tip here is something to keep in mind when shooting motion. This may be obvious, but you want the subject to be moving the same direction as the lens if you want a motion blur effect, like these pictures here. If you shoot it going the opposite way, then it will compress the subject a little bit at slower shutter speeds. One thing that I thought was hilarious is I didn't realize how slow 1/15 was. So in one of the photos you can actually see me set the frame, look back at it, and then flip it around. Because the camera is so wide, I feel like it's easy to make flat frames. The closer you get to your subjects, the more dynamic your photos become. This way you get more depth and interest in your frames. But at the same time, it is a fixed focus lens, so it is a balancing act. If you're at a 2.8, I think the minimum focal distance is around 5 feet, but if you stop down, you'll get a lot more in focus. keep the camera level for less distortion or tilt it for more. It even has a bubble on the top, which I think is awesome. Part of what makes this camera so cool is vertical lines are straight, unlike a fisheye lens. It's hard to explain, but it has to do with how the Widelux captures images in a swing motion on a curved film plane, whereas fisheye lenses stretch to capture everything all at once on a flat surface. This is part of what makes the Widelux so pleasing to view. Now here are some of the pros and cons that I noticed when shooting with the Widelux. The first thing is the lens sharpness and consistency. The lens physically moves, so you don't get the same distortion and fall off that you would normally with ultra wide lenses. Similar to what I said earlier about the distortion, the sharpness and consistency really makes the Widelux images so beautiful. Another pro is I loved shooting black and white on this camera. I loved it especially because when you shoot color, you can get so much detail in the frame that it's almost overwhelming, but the black and white simplifies it a little bit and it looks really beautiful. However, I did also really like shooting slide film on the F7 just for the reason that the negatives look so cool. I don't even know how to explain it, but I feel like anyone who loves cameras understands how cool this is. Even though the dynamic range of the slide film wasn't the best, I still really loved the photos that I got. And lastly, it feels sturdy without being too heavy, and it also doesn't need batteries. The Widelux is a fully mechanical camera. Now into some cons. Rewinding is not a joke. It really makes you question if the roll that you just shot was actually worth it. Trust me, the test roll cost me my thumb. The resistance gets harder the longer you rewind, and you'll be able to feel the resistance change once it's rewound completely. You also have to make sure to hold down the button on the bottom as you rewind it. It's just really awkward and feels uncomfortable, but maybe I'll find a smart solution to this one day. Another con is flaring. I don't really like how the flares look on this camera. Light hits the lens as it turns, and it also has like a rectangular hood. So the result is kind of like a blocky, disjointed, awkward flare. And lastly, it only has 3 relatively slow shutter speeds and only closes down to an f11, which is definitely limiting, especially when going from the inside to the outdoors. Overall, I love this camera, and I think the panoramic format has replaced square as my favorite. Sorry, Kiev. If you would like to see more of the Widelux in action, I have a very fun and relaxing video of my trip to New York, and I also have a road trip video coming up where I'll show you the rest of my test roll. And then lastly, I'm planning on making a sort of Spotify wrapped version of my cameras this year, so make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons, maybe even the notification bell, just so you know exactly when that drops. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.